Hey everyone, I'm Manero here, and in this video we're going to have a look at the brushes and illustrations I made during the final 10 days of Brushtober 2023. So let's jump right into it. Brushtober is a special event where I create a Procreate brush and an illustration with that brush every day through October. You can see my daily posts on my social media accounts, so make sure to follow through the links below. If you want to know how you can get this brush set for free for a limited time, check out the info in the description of this video for all the details. There's only about 24 hours left for you to meet the requirements after this video is up, so do not miss on this opportunity. For day 22, I made this brush that has a very interesting grain texture to it, but that it gets more opaque and with cleaner edges the more pressure you apply. I call this brush Brushtober. For this illustration, I used this cute photo referenced by Rod Long. I find elephants to be a hard animal to paint, so this was a cool opportunity to practice the subject. I started by covering the background with a base of green, and then roughly painting the silhouette of the elephant with color directly. I then sketched the elephant on top of my rough silhouette. I decided to use the texture in this brush to add shading and gradients to the figure and slowly refining the painting on the go. Since I only dedicate a limited time to each of these Brushtober paintings, I find that going with the flow and improvising can be very helpful tools. Using the same technique, I added some highlights on the elephant. Then on a new layer on top of the animal, I painted some of the vegetation with a few strokes, and I used the method of duplicating the layer, moving it, and transforming it to slowly distribute and build the full vegetation around the elephant. I also painted additional strokes to complete the look for the busy scene full of tall grass. On day 23, I came up with this cool inking brush that has a lot of flow thanks to the stabilization features in Procreate. I love how the bristles of the digital brush split randomly as you draw, giving your strokes a ton of personality. I called this brush Love and Line Work. For this illustration, I had to improvise because the electricity went off in my area and it left me without internet access for a few hours, so I couldn't search for references. I looked around in my studio and I decided to draw this bust that I have that usually decorates one of my shelves. What I liked the most about this brush was the sketchiness of the lines. It really pushes you to embrace the method I explained in my previous video, where you start by simply sketching and you slowly refine the drawing until the sketch is cool enough to become the final art. While I was drawing this, I was wondering all the time if I wanted to give color to this illustration or not, and when I started to add these harsh and thick black shadows to it, I decided not to color it. I found that the drawing was more impactful this way. Instead of giving full color to it, I ended up adding just a hint of color with this turquoise that I took from this year's Brushtober official colors, and I think it makes the figure stand out a lot. On day 24, I worked on this brush that has a painterly nature to it. It has a nice cloudy texture and it's easy to control its opacity and flow by adjusting the pressure you make with the Apple Pencil. It also has just a tiny amount of color dynamics to it. I call this brush Doodle and Chains. For this illustration, I found this nice photo referenced by Jude Infantini. I thought the fact that the background was the same color as the main subject was an interesting aspect that would be cool to explore in painting form. I started by covering the whole background with yellow, and then painting the general shapes for each element, the pepper and the lemons, all in separate layers. I also added the pepper stem on a different layer. With all this established, I could alpha lock each individual layer, and this made the process of rendering each element very easy. At the end, I added some soft shadows below the pepper and elements to make them look like they're actually placed on a surface and not just floating in space. For day 25, I made this brush that I called Pigmento. This is a really cool one, but also a bit tricky. You'll see when I paint my illustration for this day that it has a pretty extreme color dynamic to it, making you lose control of what colors you're actually choosing, making the painting process an interesting adventure. For this day, I found this amazing photo referenced by Vladislav Nikanov, and I decided to paint it. I started by painting the road covering the whole canvas, and then painting the crosswalk all flat on a separate layer. I then used the transform tool to adjust the perspective based on the reference. Then I painted the person crossing the street using straight colors without the need for a sketch. If you remember what I said a moment ago about the color dynamics, notice that when painting the yellow jacket, I'm not changing the color at all in the color wheel. It is the color dynamics in this brush that is giving me all kind of crazy colors with each brush stroke. I love this because it forces you to embrace something that you can't control and learn to make it a part of your process. It was also very noticeable when I was painting the umbrella. With all the main elements in place, I used alpha lock in the layers and I started experimenting with this brush, adding more colors and textures to the crosswalk and extra details to the clothes for the main figure. At the end, I started playing with the curves tool until I landed on a sweet color combination for the illustration as a whole. On day 26, I created this brush with an extreme texture that reminded me of paint marks made with a sponge. It also has nice blending capabilities. I call this brush Mix Max Spongy Strokes. The name is kind of a parody for the movie Mad Max Fury Road. Don't ask me why. I was just trying to be original with the brush names for this Brushtober edition. Anyway, I wanted to paint something like a desert kind of scenario in honor of the movie. I found this cool photo referenced by Neon, with that crazy rock in the center that looks like it is barely keeping the balance. I started by painting the cloudy sky, and this brush really helped making those clouds look extra fluffy. I then painted the silhouette for the different rocks and the ground on separate layers. With these 4 areas alpha locked, I could proceed to render each of them, allowing me to focus on their textures and structures rather than the general shapes. This was a basic process of observing the reference closely and trying to replicate the textures and lighting in my painting. At the end, I added the tiny person standing under the main rock. For day 27, I continued with the parody concept for naming brushes, and I called this brush Blend Runner, obviously as a reference to the Blade Runner franchise. This brush is really nice. It has kind of a squared shape that rotates following the direction of your strokes, but it also has a ton of texture showing through the lines. For this illustration I looked for cyberpunk themed photo references, and I found this really awesome one by Wilmer Martinez. I really loved the reflections in those futuristic glasses and the neon lights in the background. I started by painting the whole canvas with a dark blue and sketching the girl on a new layer. I first did a really rough sketch, and then over that I refined my drawing by doing a proper finished line work. I used a lot of black filling for all those areas where I saw deep shadows in the reference. I then used the eraser tool with the same brush to add a soft grainy texture to some of those hard edges. With the inking finished, I jumped to work on the backgrounds. I painted a single dot and duplicated it until I ended up with this grid of dots that I then put in the correct perspective using the transform tool. I used the selection tool to get rid of the parts I didn't need. And I started painting the lighting effects all around those LED lights. Duplicating those dots layer and changing the layer mode to add, then using the blur filter to spread that light really made the neon lights bright and nice while preserving their colors. I then took advantage of the grainy texture in the brush to color the girl by slowly building up soft gradients of colors. I also detailed things like the lips, the nose, and the chin. Adding specific small highlights to the face and the nose really made the rendering for the face work. I finished up the illustration by detailing the colors and textures in the clothes. And of course the highlights and reflections in the glasses. As a final touch, I added these cool neon brush strokes around the character to help round up the futuristic vibe. On day 28, and continuing with the movie parody names, I came up with this brush that I called 28 Brushes Later for the movie 28 Days Later. It's a flat type of brush with a streaky texture, and the brush tip is set at an angle, allowing for very expressive lines. Of course, with this name, I had to draw something zombie related, so I straight went and improvised a scene with a few zombies in their classic pose, trying to reach the victim with their hand. I struggled a little bit with this one because I didn't look for any reference and I felt a little rusty drawing purely from imagination, but at the end I think I managed to draw more or less what I had in mind. My process was to start from a rough sketch and slowly refining it until it became the final art, as I've done previously with a few Brushtober illustrations. I then improvised a background with the silhouette of a creepy tree behind the zombies, and I colored the scene with simple flat colors, more or less in a cel shading style. For day 29, I played with an unconventional line art brush. The shape of the tip is very irregular and gives a peculiar type of stroke. I called this brush Drawmageddon. For this illustration, I let myself carry away by the Halloween spirit and came up with the idea for a super cute ghost wandering happily through the forest. I decided to design this drawing inside a circle because I thought it would look extra cute. Of course, I had to add a couple of birds in there and some cute mushrooms to complete this super friendly vibe I was aiming for. I first worked on the idea by doing a rough sketch, and when I was happy with the placement of all the elements, I lowered the opacity of the sketch and started inking the final drawing on a new layer. I really love the type of lines that you get with this brush. I feel like they add a lot of flavor to your drawings, and I had a lot of fun inking and detailing this. With the inking finished, I decided to draw a diagonal line on a new layer, duplicate it many times to generate this sort of pattern, and using a mask on the layer, I was able to paint in the pattern only in those areas where I wanted to add this diagonal shading. I think this idea turned out great. As a final touch, I added a few hints of colors here and there, again using the signature turquoise from this Brushtober edition. And I also added a complementary touch of salmon in a couple of spots. On day 30, I made this funny textured brush. The texture is extremely visible whether you like it or not, so it forces you to embrace its influence and work with it. I called this brush a time to texture. I almost never draw or paint vehicles of any kind, so I decided that it would be a nice challenge for this illustration. I found this photo reference of a scooter by Joachim Nadel that I thought it would be perfect. I started by sketching the bike, and this stage already was a struggle for me. But I pushed through and I ended up with something acceptable. I then blocked the main shapes to make the rendering stage easier for myself. And I slowly built up the rendering, painting shadows and highlights. When the general rendering was done, I started adding a few details, and then I gave the rendering the final touches. For the background, I manually painted a pattern with different bricks, and I used the transform tool to adjust their perspective to match the wall behind the bike. And I did the same for the pattern on the sidewalk where the bike is parked. I finished the illustration by adding a shadow below the scooter and a little on the wall behind it. And finally, for the last brush for this Brushtober 2023 edition, I made this brush that I called the Dance of the Stylus. Again, just trying to be original with the brush names, but it doesn't have any special meaning behind it. It is just a reference for the movement of our Apple Pencil when we draw. This brush is a bit painterly, but it also works for making fun line work with a bit of texture. I decided to come up with a final Halloween illustration with a cute touch. For this I sketched a doggy wearing a ghost costume and a trick-or-treat basket. My idea was to fill the basket with bone-shaped candy. I kept this drawing simple because honestly, I couldn't wait to complete this Brushtober. Don't get me wrong, I had lots of fun, but it definitely is a challenge that requires lots of time and daily effort. I don't regret it at all though. It is super fun looking back at all the brushes and illustrations I made this month. And it is also extra rewarding knowing that now you guys are going to discover each of these brushes when I launch the set tomorrow. I can't wait to see what you guys will create using these brushes, and I really hope you like them. And this is it. These are the final 10 brushes I did for my Brushtober challenge 2023. Let me know in the comments which of the brushes from this video was your favorite. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss any of my videos and tutorials, and give me a thumbs up. Also make sure to check out my Gumroad page and consider making a purchase in the next 24 hours after this video is released to get this unique brush set for free. This is your final chance. I have tons of Procreate brush sets available, and I'm sure something will suit your artistic needs. All the links are in the description below. Okay, thank you for watching. See you next time.